There's one about somebody who had a prenatal diagnosis. There's another one, a gentleman who finds out that his child has a heart problem that was undetected beforehand, and that he actually has it too. So there are a lot of interesting counseling issues there. And then, and another case. So that'll really give you kind of a snapshot of what happens in a clinical setting. And I think that'll be really helpful if it's a career that you're somewhat interested in. So, are you doing the slides for me? Excellent. So I'm going to talk about some of the roles and skills. I'm going to talk about education and training, and I'm going to talk about some of the work settings. And Mrs. Lambert asked me to talk about genetic counseling, but I decided that I would include that, but also sort of give you sort of the idea of how different careers in genetics can relate, and I'm going to use a case to discuss that. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the article that you have. So the next slide, please. So thyroid cancer, a family with more than its fair share. Cancer of the thyroid gland is relatively uncommon, and it's not that common to see thyroid cancer occurring in many family members. The other thing I wanted to mention is, as I go on, you may have some thoughts about things that are in your family, things that might be genetic conditions, and thinking about them. I'm very happy to entertain questions at the end if there's time, but I like to sort of keep them like non-personal for the group, so you can always sort of come up to me afterwards if you like. A 38-year-old man, so he teaches English, and his wife have concerns about his family history. They're thinking about having kids. He had thyroid cancer at age 15, which is a relatively young age to have thyroid cancer. Thyroid cancer is common in, starts to be more common in people in their 30s and 40s. He did really well. He had surgery to remove the cancer. He is able to take replacement medicine for the thyroid hormones that are missing because of his surgery. There are other people in the family with thyroid cancer, and they'd like to know how it might affect their children. So they're referred to a genetic counselor to help sort this out. You all get your head around that kind of like, there's this in my family, I'm concerned about it happened to my children, and so they have some questions. Next, please. So genetic counseling is the process of helping people understand their family history. It's a process to help them adapt to learning about the medical issues, the psychological issues, and then the genetic information isn't just information for them, because genes come in pairs. We inherit half from our dad and half from our mom, and so we have, potentially the risk to have the same kind of condition as other people in our family. So when we make a diagnosis of a genetic condition, it's not just the diagnosis of that person, but it can affect many, many, many people. So that's the newest definition of genetic counseling. The next slide, please. So genetic counselors are healthcare professionals. We have specialized graduate training. We have a master's degree, and in the area of medical genetics and counseling. So it's a great field if you like science and you like interacting with people. Some genetic counselors work in a laboratory. They don't talk to people as much on a regular basis as I do. Some people work at a health department in public health, and they do more writing and more research. There are many genetic counselors who do clinical research. I actually worked in a lab for many years, and I did bench research and worked on mapping genes. So the background that we have in science, and the background we have in science, or the background that we have when we're in college and we take classes in writing, like all of that stuff really is important. We usually work as members of a healthcare team, and we provide information and support to families who have members with birth defects or genetic disorders, and families who may be at risk. So some people come in with questions because they wonder if there's something inherited in their family, and other people may come in because they know that there is something inherited in their family, and they need to figure out more about what that means for them. So what happens in a genetic counseling visit? So we review the personal and family medical history, so we have to have background in good interviewing skills, And so the first question I ask almost everybody when they walk into my office, besides, did you have trouble parking, is, what brings you in today? And sometimes they say, my doctor sent me a case of something, or what brings you in today? So that really helps me focus with you on the fact that we really want to know more about what brings that individual in. Like, what's on their mind about what's going on? What are the kinds of things that they're thinking about? There's a really vast difference in science literacy in this country. And so some people will come in with a long list of myths, kind of, I thought I had this in my family because of X. And so kind of working with people to try to get an understanding of what their understanding is of what's going on in their family, and then kind of merging that and helping them understand some of the other aspects of this without kind of shaking up their family dynamics, right? You want to kind of integrate their beliefs. So what do we talk about? The possible genetic risks, and we discuss inheritance patterns. So, I mean, how many of you have heard about dominant inheritance, recessive inheritance, X-linked, right. Okay. So, so have you ever tried to explain genetics to someone who's never taken a class in genetics? Have you tried to do that? So that's the challenge, right? That's one of the challenges. It's really interesting to kind of think about creative ways to explain things to people. And when it's really basic information that you're comfortable with, you learned about genetics probably a few times already in your educational career. Review appropriate testing options. So this is what we think this condition is. These are the testing options. This is what we think the condition is. We don't have any testing for that, but this is how you need to be managed. This is what we recommend. So we discuss prevention strategies, screening tools, and management. We provide genetic-related information and reliable resources. So we do have, people who come in who Google lots of stuff, or people who call and say, I read this, I read this online, and so, we try to look at the validity of the information that they've already seen, and then point them in the direction of resources, and sometimes the resources are family support. When I started out in genetic counseling a long time ago, it was a lot harder to access this information for people. And I think there's such wonderful advances in being able to kind of connect people across the country and internationally who have the same, sometimes very rare disorder with each other, so that they can get support and knowledge and information. So that's really, I think, really important, because you can provide supportive counseling. So it's not just science. It's not just science. It's really translating science and really getting a sense of where people are, what brought them in, and then at the end of the session, you always want to know if you address their concerns. Thank you. So, family history. So what are the questions that a genetic counselor may encounter? So if someone has a family history of a certain health condition, they might be concerned if they are a carrier, if they're at risk, if this is something might happen to them, and is there a genetic test I can take to find out if that's the case? Planning a pregnancy, what type of testing is available? A known genetic information in the family, so somebody might say, and this happens to me in the hereditary cancer world that I work in. I got a letter from a cousin. She said she had genetic testing. She said she was positive for a BRCA mutation, and the letter said I should discuss this with my healthcare provider, so my doctor sent me in to talk about this more. So the more genetic testing becomes kind of mainstream in medicine, the more likely that people are going to get information from other family members. I have a medical condition and I want to learn whether I can pass it on to my children. And that kind of gets us back to the scenario of this couple who he has thyroid cancer and he's concerned about what next. So the mother, so we took a family history. So getting a good family history is helpful. Not everyone knows a lot about their family history. Some people are estranged from their family, some people are adopted, some people you know, raised in another country from their biological parents. We have a lot of different variations on how much people know, but we do the best we can. And so we found out that this gentleman's mother had medullary thyroid cancer at 25 and a pheochromocytoma at 65 and died from metastatic cancer. So in short, she had a thyroid cancer and then she developed another condition, and that gave us clues. So knowing, we have to learn a lot about medical terminology and we have to read a lot of pathology reports, and we have to read a lot of general articles to kind of give us background, because some genetic conditions are pretty rare, and there are times that there's something in a report that, you know, still after working in this field for almost 40 years, I've never seen before, so we still have to do that. Which is another thing I wanted to say about this field. Like, I have found that over the years, it just continues to get more and more interesting. It's, you know, there's more to learn, there are more technologies that's emerging, and, you know, there's like rarely a day that goes by where I say, you know, okay, I'm done, you know, this is it, I don't have to learn anymore. It's a career where you're constantly learning, and that's one of the things that's challenging about it, but I think it's one of the things that's really, really exciting about it, because you really, for most people, you really don't know on a day-to-day basis, like when you hit the office, what's gonna be. And, you know, yes.
So, question about that. So, when you go to your office, you have appointments with patients, but then you
Yep.
have a lot of time in between to prepare for them.
Right.
And so, how would you say your week looks like in terms
Well,
of?
sometimes I wake up really early and
Yeah.
do a talk like this,
Yeah.
which I did a talk on Friday at 7:30, and so I do a lot of teaching, and that's really unpredictable, because that kind of depends on who wants me to do something when. But for a typical genetic counselor, they might come in, and they may be in a situation where they're only doing clinical work. I have a mixture of a lot of things. So some people might come in, and basically on a day-to-day basis, they come in and they see patients almost all day, every day. Right? I see patients sort of a day and a half a week, and then add in emergency cases when I need to, sort of about a day and a half a week. I teach medical students a half a day a week. I grade their papers about a half a day a week. And then I work on some committees at the medical school and at the State Department of Public Health, so I do research and writing and things like that. So, and when they all demand 100% of my time, it's a little crazy, but, you know, we kind of make it work. So in this family, family history, the mom, the grandmother had thyroid cancer. So on the next slide, let's see, it's this is a family tree, and I sort of made it a little more stylish. But here he is, there's his wife, here's his mother and his grandmother. So all of the people here who are colored in this gold color have had thyroid cancer. So what kind of pattern of inheritance does this look like to you?
It's on the dad's.
It's on the dad's side. Uh-huh. Somebody said dominant? Did somebody say dominant, maybe? Recessive? Multiple generations are affected, right? So that's more likely to be dominant inheritance, yeah? All right. Next slide. So the genetic evaluation. So this is a condition that's a dominant genetic condition, and the risk of having an affected child if you carry a dominant gene is what? 50%. Yeah, right, 1 in 2, 50%. And genetic testing is available. The condition I was thinking about when I got this family history was something called multiple endocrine neoplasia, and it's abbreviated as MEN. So it's tumors that occur in the endocrine glands. You probably learned something about that. Like the thyroid, okay, as one. And multiple, the people can get multiple tumors. So it's abbreviated MEN. So when you Google MEN2A, you get like really weird things, but multiple endocrine neoplasia. So the next slide. Genetic testing is available for that. There's a gene called menin that we can test for. family has genetic counseling, and the testing process is explained, and additional discussion about the wife's family history is discussed. We'll kind of keep going on from there. Next, please. And so here's what I wanted to sort of stop talking about genetic counseling and say, for people who are interested in research, in bench research, so we couldn't offer this genetic test to people unless there were a lot of other people who are working in this area. So this is a cartoon of a gene, and here's, so the particular gene works, I'm sorry, it's the RET gene, the RET gene. It's this particular gene. Menin is associated with multiple endocrineoplasia type 1. So this is a picture of the part of the protein that is outside the cells, is part of the protein that's inside the cells. So people have figured out like a lot about this particular protein, the RET protein. And the little stars here, so are above these blocks. These blocks, this is the cartoon of the gene, these blocks are the exons of the gene. Does that sound familiar? You've learned anything about genetic structure, right? The exons of the gene are the blocks. And so these stars and these other circles and pentagons, these are like areas in the gene where, there have been mutations found. And so a lot of biochemists, researchers have done a lot of work figuring this all out. And this is really important to this case. So next slide. So the gene mutations in the RET gene, this is a little hard to see, I'm really sorry. But here, this is one area where there's a lot of different types of mutations. So scientists have studied people with the condition to help determine the best age to treat the risk for thyroid cancer, because in this particular condition, the best thing to do for people to prevent cancer is to remove the thyroid at a young age, sometimes in children, and it prevents them from developing cancer. And so in the next slide, we've been able to figure out, so this is a graph, and let's look at this for a minute, just this one. So this is the age in years, so you can actually see that about, let's look at this, 10% of people with this condition develop thyroid cancer by age 20. It's 1 in 10 people, right? Which is a lot higher than the rate of thyroid cancer in the general population. So what we try to do is figure out when in this age range to try to remove the thyroid gland before it's cancerous. Because medullary thyroid cancer, as opposed to other types of thyroid cancer, is a lot harder to treat. Next slide. So genetic testing. So genetic testing involves, most of the time, testing DNA of an individual, of a fetus. We may do it to establish a diagnosis. We may do it to test to see if somebody's a carrier. Next one, please. So the test might be positive, the test might be negative, the test might be hard to interpret. So one of the things that we talk to people about so that they can anticipate that in the original session is that these 3 possibilities. We may find something for sure, we may find something not for sure. And when you decide to have testing, we need to be ready. How would you feel if you came in and you saw somebody and they said, well, I'm going to do this test and I'm really not sure what the test is going to show? Is that a test you think you might want to have? The test is going to show something very, like, clear 1% of the time, but 99% of the time we're going to get a test result and we're going to go, I don't know what to do with this. That would not be a good test, right? I mean, most people would say, nah, I don't think so. You know, it would be, the information is more likely in that situation to be very confusing compared to very clear. And we want clarity as much as possible. We don't always have clarity. We have, you know, we're not sure situations sometimes. But in the counseling session, we want to make sure that we tell people that there could be a possibility of unclear result. And as a genetic counselor, our training, our education also teaches us how to read papers and look at information so that we can be a good arbiter of that. Make sense? Next slide, please. So we found a particular mutation in this guy's Rett gene. They come back to talk about the results. And the next slide. So we found this mutation, that's a change in the normal base pair sequence. And so again, there's this information that's very technical that relates to someone's health that we try to sit down and explain so they understand it. The next slide. So they come back 6 years later to see the medical geneticist who's specialized in training in medical genetics. So people can work in genetics as a physician. There's a specialized training. People usually will go to medical school, get a residency after medical school in either pediatrics or obstetrics and gynecology or in internal medicine, and then they go on for another 3 years to do a fellowship, and they learn how to be a genetics doctor. So, and so they want an examination of their 15-month-old son, and then in the next slide, their son has a 50% risk to be affected. He has been very healthy except for a couple of ear infections. They want to do genetic testing to help determine the need for him to have a thyroidectomy. So this is one situation, unlike the Angelina Jolie story, this is one situation where testing a child makes a lot of sense because we can intervene and prevent, there's a known, well-known strategy to prevent cancer. It's not a benign strategy, it's still surgery. The child, would have to be on medication for a long time, but like every medical decision, it's weighing the pros and cons. That's the other thing we talk about in counseling, sort of what are the benefits of doing something, what are the burdens of doing something, and how does that work for you? So the next, so he has the same mutation as his father. They come back and talk about the test results and management, and they're referred to a pediatric endocrinology physician for evaluation before surgery. And so, I could keep going, thank you. So, go again, next one. Next slide. Oh, it'll go back.
That's the one.
So this is the one. So these are digital recordings. Go ahead.
I've downloaded it. We went on a field trip on Thursday and we didn't see each other on Friday. So in your Google Chromebook, you've got all these different sessions. The other students in the other classes have all watched the Bennett student session, and it was wonderful. And the first question they asked was, how was parking? And then they said, what brings you in today? So it was good. It was just a great idea of saying, there's a person who's coming in, and he's nervous.
Yeah.
And he's scared for his daughter, who's 8, Emma. And then what does a genetic counselor do to work through this?
Yep.
So you can all access that session. You just turn on that link.
They're really good, and they're specifically designed for teaching or for exposing individuals to a genetic counseling session. Since it's not that easy to, call someone up and take time out of your day when you're in high school and go shadow someone, it's really a nice way of seeing, gee, is this something that I feel like I could be doing? So the next slide kind of goes back to how do you prepare for a career? I really always emphasize that a broad-based education is really, really important because although you want to learn biology and molecular biology, biochemistry, maybe engineering, maybe bioethics, you still need to write, you still need to read. And some of the stuff that you read is pretty technical, but you still need to sort of read. And good reasoning skills are really important, communication skills are really important. How do you get to know more? You have a great resource now, the National Society of Genetic Counselors is probably on in your Chromebook. And so one of the things that's great about that is it has up-to-date information about specifically for students who are looking at this as a career. So it's probably the best resource out there. Internships, volunteer work, job shadowing. So when you get to college, if you during college, if you're thinking about this, you should contact genetic counselors where you're going to school and ask them to, if you can come in and shadow for a day, see what they do. Volunteer work is really important because it really helps people figure out whether being in a situation where there's a lot of tension and people are depending on you is a place that they feel comfortable in, or you know, I mean, I was terrified. First time I had to do like so many things, I was terrified, like really terrified. But I'm like, okay, I learned how to do this, and I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna do my best. And, you know, the first time I segued from what I was doing before to see a patient who was concerned about cancer risk was 10 years ago, and I've been in the field for 30 years. I was still a little terrified. This was completely a new area. Don't let that bother, you know, like, don't let that bother you. It's like, you can learn it. You have the communication skills and the ability to understand science. You know, you can make this career like a great career. Work study, co-op programs, people do have to take the GREs to get into grad school, so it is something that requires grad school. There's also at UConn, there's a program called the Diagnostic Genetics Program that is an undergraduate program, so after 2 years you can sort of segue into this other program and learn a lot of stuff about what it's like to work in a genetics lab. And I think that's my last slide. So, right? Yeah, okay, I got it. So, that's
So I'll turn off